They say ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things, but Emily Carter never believed it. Not until the night the earth literally moved beneath her feet, and she discovered that sometimes the person you think you know the least is yourself. In the span of 8 hours, a hotel lobby became a battleground, a basement became a sanctuary, and 3 strangers became something she never expected. What started as another mundane night shift would end with revelations that would shatter everything she thought she knew about courage, deception, and the thin line between salvation and destruction.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The Grandview Hotel's marble lobby gleamed under the soft amber lighting, its polished surfaces reflecting the kind of understated luxury that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. At 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in March, the space held that particular stillness that comes with late hours and empty corridors. Emily Carter sat behind the mahogany reception desk, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she processed the day's final check-ins, her movements precise and economical after 3 years of night shifts. At 28, Emily had perfected the art of invisibility. Her brown hair was always pulled back in a neat bun, her navy blazer pressed and proper, her smile professional but never too warm. She was the kind of person people looked through rather than at, which suited her perfectly. The night shift meant fewer interactions, fewer complications, fewer chances for the anxiety that had plagued her since college to rear its ugly head. The elevator chimed and Marcus Thompson emerged like a storm cloud in an Armani suit. Emily recognized him immediately, one of the hotel's VIP guests, a real estate mogul whose company's logo graced half the billboards downtown, or at least it used to. Recent news reports have been less kind to Thompson Enterprises, though Marcus carried himself with the same arrogant swagger that had made him both rich and widely disliked. Marcus approached the desk with the particular stride of someone accustomed to having doors opened and paths cleared. His silver hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour, his tie still knotted with mathematical precision. But Emily, trained in the subtle art of reading guests, noticed the slight tremor in his hands and the way his eyes avoided direct contact. "I need you to call the Penthouse restaurant," Marcus commanded without preamble, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had never been told no. "Tell them to send up a bottle of their most expensive scotch, the Macallan, if they have it." Emily's fingers moved to her phone. "Of course, Mr. Thompson, I'll call them right away, though I should mention they closed at 10. I could contact room service." "I don't want room service," Marcus interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "I want the restaurant. Wake someone up if you have to. Do you know who I am?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Emily felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in her chest. The same feeling that had made her choose night shifts and corner desks and jobs where she could hide behind professional courtesy. But something in Marcus's tone, a desperate edge beneath the bluster, made her look at him more carefully. "Yes, sir, I know who you are," Emily replied evenly, "but the restaurant staff has gone home for the night. However, I can arrange for the same scotch to be delivered from room service within 20 minutes. Would that be acceptable?" Marcus's jaw tightened, and for a moment Emily thought he might explode. Instead, he deflated slightly, like a balloon losing air. "Fine, whatever. Just make it fast." As Emily placed the call, she watched Marcus pace the lobby with the restless energy of a caged animal. He kept checking his phone, then putting it away, then checking it again. His usual confident posture had given way to something more hunched, more desperate. She wondered what kind of pressure could make a man like Marcus Thompson look so human. The soft squeak of wheels announced Rosa Martinez's arrival. The cleaning cart emerged from the service corridor first, followed by Rosa herself, her gray hair tied back with a colorful scarf that had seen better years but somehow maintained its dignity. At 55, Rosa moved with the efficient grace of someone who had spent decades making other people's spaces beautiful, even if no one noticed her doing it. Rosa had been working the night shift at the Grandview for 8 years, ever since her husband Carlos died and left her with 2 kids to raise on her own. Both children were grown now. Maria was a teacher in Phoenix, and Diego was finishing his engineering degree at State. But Rosa had stayed. The work was honest, the hours suited her night owl tendencies, and she had grown fond of the quiet elegance of the hotel after dark. "Evening, Emily," Rosa called softly as she began arranging her supplies. Her English carried the musical cadence of her native Spanish, each word carefully chosen and pronounced with the precision of someone who had learned the language as an adult. "So far, so good," Emily replied, grateful for Rosa's steady presence. Unlike most of the hotel staff, Rosa treated Emily like a person rather than a fixture. They had developed an easy friendship over the years, built on shared late-night shifts and mutual respect. Marcus paused in his pacing to glance at Rosa with the kind of dismissive look he might give a piece of furniture. Rosa, accustomed to such treatment from guests, simply smiled and began mopping the far end of the lobby, her movements rhythmic and meditative. "Excuse me," Marcus called sharply. "Could you do that somewhere else? The noise is disturbing." Rosa looked up, her expression polite but firm. "I apologize, senor, but this is my scheduled time for this area. I can work more quietly if you prefer." "What I'd prefer," Marcus said, his voice carrying the particular cruelty that comes with displaced frustration, "is for the help to be invisible. Isn't that what we're paying for?" The words hung in the air like a slap. Emily felt her face flush with anger, but Rosa simply nodded with the dignity of someone who had weathered worse storms. She moved her cart to the opposite end of the lobby, her movements careful and quiet. Emily wanted to say something, to defend Rosa, but the words got caught in her throat like they always did. Instead, she busied herself with paperwork, hating herself for her silence, hating the way privilege seemed to give people license to be cruel. The room service waiter arrived 20 minutes later with Marcus's scotch, and the mogul retreated to the elevator without another word to either woman. The lobby returned to its hushed tranquility, broken only by the soft sounds of Rosa's work and the gentle hum of the building's climate system. "He's not usually that bad," Emily offered quietly, though we both knew it was a lie. Rosa smiled, the kind of smile that held years of patience and wisdom. Men like that, they're scared of something, make some mean. But scared men, they show you who they really are when the world shakes a little. Emily nodded, though she didn't really understand. Her world had always been steady, predictable, safe. The most dramatic thing that had ever happened to her was getting promoted to senior night receptionist. And even that had taken 2 years of careful, cautious work. She couldn't imagine what it would take to shake her world and what she might discover about herself if it did. The first tremor felt like a heavy truck passing outside, a subtle vibration that made the crystal chandelier sway gently above the lobby. Emily looked up from her computer, frowning. The Grandview was built on solid bedrock, and the nearest construction site was miles away. Rosa paused in her cleaning, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. Then, the world exploded into motion.
The second tremor hit like a freight train driven by an angry god. The entire building lurched sideways, sending Emily's coffee mug sliding across the reception desk to shatter on the marble floor. The elegant chandelier above began swaying violently, its crystals chiming against each other in a discordant symphony of approaching chaos. Emily gripped the edges of her desk as the floor rolled beneath her feet like the deck of a storm-tossed ship. Her computer monitor toppled backward, pulling cables and scattering the neat stacks of papers he had organized with such care. Somewhere in the distance, car alarms began wailing like electronic banshees, and the soft jazz that had been playing through the hotel sound system cut to an ominous silence. And this was no passing truck. This was an earthquake. And from the way the building groaned around them like a living thing in pain, it was a big one. Rosa had dropped to her knees beside her cart, one hand pressed against the wall for stability, her eyes wide but alert. Years of living in California had taught her to recognize the difference between a minor tremor and something serious. This was serious. "Emily!" Rosa shouted over the growing rumble. "Get away from the windows!"
The warning came just in time. The massive plate glass windows that formed the lobby's front wall began to flex and buckle like water. Hairline cracks appeared, spreading with the speed of lightning across the pristine surfaces. Emily stumbled away from the reception desk just as the window behind her exploded inward, showering the marble floor with glittering shards. The lights flickered once, twice, then died completely, plunging the lobby into the eerie darkness of a city under siege. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in a hellish red glow that made the destruction look like a scene from an apocalypse movie. The beautiful, serene lobby had become a war zone in the span of 30 seconds. Through the gaping holes where the windows had been, Emily could hear the city screaming. Car horns blared continuously, sirens wailed in the distance, and underneath it all was a sound she had never heard before. The groaning, cracking voice of a metropolis being shaken apart at its foundations. Office buildings swayed like grass in the wind, their windows popping out in cascades of glass that caught the streetlights like deadly snow. "We need to get to the basement," Rosa called, pulling herself upright with the help of her cleaning cart. "The shelter area." Emily nodded, though her legs felt like water. She had practiced earthquake drills, of course. Every California building was required to, but the reality was nothing like the orderly evacuation procedure she had memorized. This was chaos, pure and primal, the kind that reduced civilization to its most basic elements: survive or die. They had made it halfway to the service corridor when the elevator chimed. The sound was so incongruous, so perfectly normal in the midst of catastrophe, that both women froze. The elevator doors slid open with their usual mechanical courtesy, revealing Marcus Thompson. But this was not the arrogant mogul who had demanded scotch an hour earlier. This was a man stripped of pretense by terror, his expensive suit torn and dusty, his silver hair disheveled, his face pale with shock. "What's happening?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "The building is moving. My room, everything's destroyed. The mirrors, the windows, everything's broken." Another tremor hit, stronger than the first two, and the remaining chandelier crashed to the lobby floor in an explosion of crystal and twisted metal. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, and in its aftermath, I could hear something new. The groaning of structural supports pushed beyond their design limits. "Earthquake," Emily managed to say, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "We need to get to the basement shelter. Now." "The basement?" Marcus looked around wildly at the destruction. "Are you insane? We need to get out of the building." "Not in an earthquake," Rosa said firmly, moving toward the service corridor. "The lobby is too dangerous with all this glass, and the streets are worse. The basement is reinforced. It's the safest place." As if to punctuate her point, another window exploded somewhere above them, raining glass down into the lobby like deadly confetti. Marcus flinched, and Emily saw something in his eyes she had never expected to see in a man like him. Complete, overwhelming fear. Not just concern or worry, but the kind of primal terror that strips away everything artificial and leaves only the raw human animal. "This way," Emily said, finding reserves of calm she didn't know she possessed. She grabbed the emergency flashlight from behind the reception desk and led the way toward the service corridor, Rose's cart squeaking behind them and Marcus following with the uncertain steps of a man who had suddenly discovered that money couldn't buy safety when the earth itself turned hostile. The service corridor was a utilitarian contrast to the lobby's elegance, with plain concrete walls and fluorescent emergency lighting that cast harsh shadows. Their footsteps echoed in the narrow space as they made their way toward the basement access, and Emily found herself taking charge in a way that felt both foreign and strangely natural. "The shelter area is designed for this," she explained as they walked, partly to reassure the others and partly to calm her own nerves. "Reinforced concrete, independent power supply, emergency supplies. We'll be safe there until the rescue kings can get to us." "Rescue teams?" Marcus's voice cracked again. "How bad is this? I mean, how long are we talking?" Another tremor answered him, weaker than the previous ones, but still strong enough to send dust cascading from the ceiling. Through the building's ventilation system, they could hear the sounds of destruction, glass breaking, metal twisting. And underneath it all was the deep bass rumble of a city under assault. Office buildings swayed like grass in the wind, their windows popping out in cascades of glass that caught the streetlights like deadly snow. "I don't know," Emily admitted as they reached the basement door. "But we were alive, and we're safe for now, and that's what matters." The basement shelter was exactly what she had promised. A concrete bunker, equipped with folding chairs, emergency supplies, and battery-powered radio equipment. The space was windowless and cramped, designed more for function than comfort, but after the chaos of the lobby, it felt like sanctuary. Rosa immediately began checking the emergency supplies while Marcus stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe where he found himself. Emily tuned the emergency radio, searching through static until she found a news broadcast. Preliminary magnitude estimates of 7.2 on the Richter scale, with the epicenter located approximately 15 miles northeast of downtown. Emergency services are reporting widespread damage to infrastructure, with multiple building collapses and major fires burning out of control in several districts. Citizens are advised to shelter in place and avoid travel unless absolutely necessary. The broadcaster's professional comm couldn't hide the magnitude of what was happening above them. Emily felt the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders like a physical thing. They weren't just waiting out a minor emergency. They were survivors of a major disaster, trapped underground while their world literally fell apart above them. 7.2, Marcus repeated numbly. That's really bad, isn't it? "It's bad," Rosa confirmed, her voice steady despite everything. She had found a battery-powered lantern and set it on the small table, casting warmer light around the scrap space. I looked at my companions, really looked at them, for the first time since the chaos began. Rosa, calm and practical, was already organizing the emergency supplies with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making the best of difficult situations. Marcus, stripped of his usual arrogance by circumstances beyond his control, looked smaller somehow, more human. And herself, Emily wasn't sure who she was anymore. The quiet, anxious receptionist who had started this shift seemed like a different person, someone from a life that no longer existed. In her place was someone who had taken charge, made decisions, led others to safety, someone she didn't recognize but was beginning to like. As the hours passed in their concrete sanctuary, Emily began to notice things that didn't add up. Marcus's expensive watch was missing. Strange for a man who wore luxury like armor. Rose's cleaning cart contained items that had nothing to do with housekeeping, and the basement shelter they were hiding in seemed far too well equipped for a simple hotel emergency bunker. By the time Emily realized what was really happening, it would be too late to run.
The emergency radio crackled with updates throughout the night, each report painting a darker picture of the devastation above. Downtown LA was in chaos. Major freeways had buckled and collapsed. Fires burned unchecked in multiple districts. The death toll was climbing, and rescue operations wouldn't begin in earnest until daylight brought better visibility and safer conditions for emergency crews. Emily sat on one of the folding chairs, the emergency lantern casting dancing shadows on the concrete walls around them. The basement shelter had become their entire world, a 20 by 15-foot bubble of relative safety in a city gone mad. But as the immediate terror of the earthquake faded, she began to notice details that had escaped her attention in the chaos. Marcus had been pacing for hours, his movements restless and agitated in a way that seemed about more than just their circumstances. He kept checking his pockets, patting his jacket as if searching for something that wasn't there. His expensive silk tie had been loosened and hung askew, and there was a stain on his shirt that looked suspiciously like blood, though Emily couldn't see any obvious injury. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing to the stain. Marcus looked down at his shirt, then quickly pulled his jacket closed. "It's nothing, just a scratch from the broken glass." But his eyes avoided hers when he said it,
and Emily caught Rosa watching him with an expression of quiet speculation. There was something in the older woman's face that suggested she saw more than she was letting on. Rosa herself was an enigma wrapped in efficiency. She had taken charge of organizing their supplies with military precision, creating neat stacks of water bottles, energy bars, and first aid materials. But Emily had noticed that Rosa's cleaning cart contained some unusual items for a hotel housekeeper: a set of professional-grade lockpicks, a small digital camera, and what looked suspiciously like surveillance equipment. "Rosa," Emily said carefully, "that's quite a collection of equipment you have there." The older woman glanced up from where she was checking the battery levels on their emergency radio. For a moment, her carefully maintained mask of humble servitude slipped, revealing something sharper underneath. "A woman in my position learns to be prepared for many things." "What position is that exactly?" Emily pressed. Something about the way Rosa moved, the way she assessed their surroundings with tactical precision, didn't match the story of a simple cleaning lady working to support her family. Rosa smiled, but it was a different kind of smile than Emily was used to seeing from her. This smile had edges. "I think, Mija, that tonight we all might learn things about each other that we didn't expect." Before Emily could respond, Marcus suddenly spun around to face them, his composure finally cracking completely. "Okay, I can't take this anymore. We need to talk. All of us. Because I think we're all here for reasons that have nothing to do with coincidence." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the concrete basement. "What do you mean?" Marcus ran his hands through his disheveled hair, leaving it sticking up at odd angles. I think we need to stop pretending we don't know why we're really here. Emily, you've been watching me for weeks. Don't think I haven't noticed. And Rosa," he pointed an accusatory finger at the older woman, "I saw you in the penthouse corridor last Tuesday. You were supposed to be cleaning the lobby, but you were on the 24th floor with equipment that had nothing to do with housekeeping." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken truths. Emily felt the careful structure of her world shifting again, but this time it wasn't the earth moving beneath her feet. This was something far more personal and potentially far more dangerous. "You're right," Rosa said finally, her accent suddenly less pronounced. "We should talk. But first, Emily, you need to know that your quiet little night job isn't as quiet as you think it is." Emily's mouth dried. "What do you mean?" "The FBI has been investigating Thompson Enterprises for money laundering and fraud for 6 months. Special Agent Rosa Martinez, Financial Crimes Division. And you, Emily Carter, have been our inside source, whether you knew it or not." The badge gleamed in the lantern light, real and official, and completely impossible. Emily's mind reeled as she tried to process what she was hearing. That's insane. I'm just a receptionist. I don't know anything about—" "You know everything," Marcus interrupted, his voice bitter. "Every transaction, every wire transfer, every shady meeting in the penthouse. You processed it all through the hotel's business center. You think we chose the Grand View by accident? You think your promotion to senior night receptionist was based on merit?" Emily felt like the world was tilting again, but this time it had nothing to do with seismic activity. "You're saying my job was, what, some kind of setup?" "Not a setup," Rosa corrected. "An opportunity. We needed someone with access to the hotel's computer systems, someone who worked nights when the most sensitive business was conducted, someone who was invisible enough to watch without being noticed. You fit the profile perfectly." "But I never gave you any information. I never reported anything to the FBI. I don't even know what you're talking about." Rosa's smile was almost motherly. "Mija, you've been giving us information every night for months. Every key card you programmed, every meeting room you booked, every business center transaction you processed. It all went into the hotel's computer system. And the hotel's computer system has been compromised since last Christmas." The revelation hit Emily like a physical blow. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her job, her place in the world was built on lies.
She had been a pawn in a game she didn't even know was being played. Her quiet competence turned into a weapon she never meant to wield. "The earthquake," she said slowly, pieces clicking together in her mind. "You were here tonight to arrest him." "Tonight was supposed to be the end of a very long investigation," Rosa confirmed. "Marcus had a meeting with his money laundering contacts at 2 a.m. We were going to take him and his associates in one coordinated sweep." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Joke's on all of us then, because I wasn't here for any meeting. I was here to die." The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Emily stared at Marcus, trying to reconcile the broken man in front of her with the arrogant businessman she thought she knew. "What? You want the truth? Here's the truth." Marcus slumped into one of the folding chairs, suddenly looking every one of his 45 years. "Thompson Enterprises collapsed 3 weeks ago. Not just financially, completely. I lost everything. The company, the properties, my family's trust fund, my kids' college funds, everything. The FBI investigation was the least of my problems." He pulled the small prescription bottle from his jacket pocket and rattled it meaningfully. "I came here tonight to take these with that expensive scotch. I figured if I was going to check out, I might as well do it somewhere with thread count sheets and room service." Emily felt her anger deflating, replaced by something more complicated. "You were going to kill yourself?" "Was," Marcus emphasized, past tense, "because apparently the universe had other plans. I was sitting in my room, trying to work up the courage, when the walls started dancing. And suddenly, dying didn't seem like such an urgent priority anymore. Funny how near-death experiences can cure suicidal ideation."
Rosa was studying Marcus with the trained eye of someone accustomed to evaluating human motivations. "The blood on your shirt. I punched the bathroom mirror when I realized I was going to live through this." Marcus held up his bandaged right hand. Seemed like the thing to do at the time. Emily looked back and forth between her two companions, trying to process the layers of deception and revelation that had been peeled away in the space of a few minutes. The quiet, predictable world she had inhabited just hours earlier now seemed like something from someone else's life. "So what now?" she asked. "The investigation, the arrest, all of it? What happens now?" Rosa glanced at the emergency radio, which was still crackling with disaster reports. "Now we survive. The rest of it, we'll figure out the rest when we get out of here." But Emily was beginning to suspect that getting out might be more complicated than any of them realized, because as she looked around their concrete sanctuary, she was starting to notice things that didn't add up. The basement shelter was too well equipped, too sophisticated for a simple hotel emergency bunker. The supplies were too current, too specifically chosen, and the radio equipment looked military grade, not the kind of thing a civilian building would have in an emergency kit. "Rosa," she said carefully, "this isn't really a hotel shelter, is it?" The FBI agent's expression was unreadable in the lantern light. "What makes you say that?" Emily gestured around the room. "This equipment, these supplies, they're too specialized. And the door we came through, I noticed it locks from the inside with a keypad. Hotel shelters don't have electronic locks." Marcus looked up sharply. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I think we might not be in a hotel basement at all."
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The camera was small, professional grade, and had been recording their every word since they had entered the basement. Emily's discovery sent a chill through the cramped space that had nothing to do with the concrete walls around them. She pointed it out to the others with a trembling finger, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're being watched." Rose's FBI training kicked in immediately. She was on her feet and examining the camera with the practiced eye of someone who had seen surveillance equipment in all its forms. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed to fold in on himself, the last of his composure finally cracking. "This is impossible," he whispered. "This is absolutely impossible." "The camera's connected to something," Rosa reported, tracing nearly invisible wires that ran along the ceiling and disappeared into the walls. "Professional installation? probably tied into a larger surveillance network. This isn't random. Someone wanted us here. Emily felt her chest tighten with the familiar onset of panic, but underneath the fear was something new: anger. She was tired of being manipulated, tired of being used as a pawn in games she didn't understand. The quiet receptionist who had started this night was gone, replaced by someone who demanded answers. Who? She asked, her voice stronger than she felt. Who wanted us here? The answer came from an unexpected source: the emergency radio. Instead of disaster reports, a calm, professional voice filled the basement. "Good evening, Emily, Rosa, and Marcus. I trust you're all comfortable." The three survivors stared at the radio as if it had grown fangs. The voice was male, middle-aged, with the kind of precise diction that suggested expensive education and careful practice. "My name is Dr. Richard Hawthorne, and I owe you all an explanation." Rosa was already examining the radio, looking for additional components that might explain how their conversation had been hijacked. "Sophisticated," she muttered. "Very sophisticated." "Please don't bother trying to trace the signal," Dr. Hawthorne continued, as if he could see Rosa's actions. "And yes, Agent Martinez, we know exactly who you are. We have been monitoring your investigation for some time." "What do you want?" Emily found her voice. "Why are we here?" "You're here because you're perfect," the voice replied. "Each of you represents a different aspect of human nature under extreme stress. Emily, the anxious observer who finds strength in crisis. Rosa, the guardian who protects others through deception. Marcus, the powerful man brought low by his own choices. Together you form a fascinating study in adaptive behavior." Marcus exploded. "Study? You son of a bitch, are you saying you caused the earthquake?" Dr. Hawthorne's laugh was genuinely amused. "Oh my, no. The earthquake was entirely natural, though remarkably convenient for our purposes. We've been preparing for such an event for years, waiting for the right combination of circumstances and subjects. Tonight, everything aligned perfectly." Emily's mind was racing, trying to piece together the implications. The hotel. The job. My promotion, none of it was real. On the contrary, everything was real. We simply guided events to ensure the proper participants would be in the proper place at the proper time. The Grandview Hotel has been under our management for 3 years, specifically modified to serve as a controlled environment for behavioral research. Behavioral research, Rosa repeated, her agent training helping her maintain focus despite the surreal situation. What kind of behavioral research? The kind that examines how ordinary people respond to extraordinary circumstances, how they adapt, and how they reveal their true nature when stripped of social pretenses and forced to confront genuine existential threat. You three have provided us with invaluable data over the past few hours. Emily felt sick. Every moment of courage she had discovered, every decision she had made to help the others, every step toward becoming the person she never knew she could be, it had all been observed, recorded, analyzed like a lab rat in a maze. The earthquake was real, she said, needing to confirm at least one thing she could believe in. People really died tonight. Unfortunately, yes. And please don't think we're monsters. We had no advance warning of the seismic event. But when it occurred, we recognized it as an unprecedented opportunity to study human behavior under genuine life or death pressure. The data you've provided tonight will help us better understand how to prepare people for future disasters. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the concrete floor. I don't care about your research. I want out, now. I'm afraid that's not possible at the moment, Dr. Hawthorne replied. The building above you has sustained significant structural damage. Attempting to leave before the area has been declared safe would be genuinely dangerous.
However, I can assure you that rescue teams will reach you by morning." "And then what?" Emily demanded. "What happens to us when this is over?" The silence that followed her question was longer than the others, and when Dr. Hawthorne spoke again, his tone had shifted slightly. "That depends largely on choices you make in the next few hours." Rose's FBI instincts were fully engaged now. "Explain." "You've all been placed in a unique position. You know things that could be problematic for our organization. Emily, you've discovered that your employment was an elaborate setup. Agent Martinez, you know that your investigation was compromised from the beginning. Marcus, you've learned that your business collapse may have been accelerated to create the psychological conditions necessary for tonight's study." The implications of that statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. "You destroyed my company for an experiment?" "We applied pressure to existing weaknesses. Your financial difficulties were genuine, Marcus, but yes, we may have accelerated their timeline to ensure you would be in the proper psychological state for our research." Emily watched Marcus's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and something approaching murder. The man who had been suicidal just hours earlier was now vibrating with fury, his hands clenched into fists. "You destroyed my life for an experiment? We provided you with an opportunity to discover who you really are when everything else is stripped away. Isn't that valuable? Haven't you learned things about yourself tonight that you never would have discovered otherwise?" Emily wanted to argue, wanted to rage against the manipulation and violation of their lives, but she couldn't deny that Dr. Hawthorne was right. She had discovered reserves of strength and leadership she never knew she possessed. She had taken charge in crisis, made decisions under pressure, become someone she actually respected. But the cost? "What kind of choices?" she asked. "You said what happens to us depends on choices we make." "Simple ones, really. You can choose to remember tonight as a natural disaster that brought 3 strangers together in a basement shelter. Your lives can return to normal, though I suspect all 3 of you have been changed by your experiences in ways that will reshape your futures regardless. Or you can choose to pursue the truth about what really happened here tonight, in which case I'm afraid your lives would become considerably more complicated. Our organization has significant resources and very little patience for exposure." The threat was delivered with the same calm professionalism as everything else Dr. Hawthorne had said, but it was unmistakably a threat. Emily looked at her companions and saw her own thoughts reflected in their faces. They were being offered a choice between comfortable lies and dangerous truth. Rosa spoke first. "What guarantee do we have that you'll honor either choice?" "None," Dr. Hawthorne admitted. "But consider your alternatives. If we meant you harm, you'd already be harmed. We're offering you a way forward that acknowledges what you've experienced while protecting all parties involved." Emily realized that this was the moment that would define the rest of their lives. Not the earthquake, not the revelations about manipulation and surveillance, but this choice. Accept the lies and return to safety, or pursue truth and face whatever consequences that brought. She thought about the woman she had been 12 hours earlier. Quiet, anxious, invisible. She thought about the woman she had become. Strong, decisive, courageous. Which one did she want to be when morning came? Emily's decision came with an unexpected twist. She wasn't the only one who had been recording tonight's events, and the evidence she had been secretly collecting all night would either save them all or destroy them all.
Emily reached into her blazer pocket and withdrew something that made both Rosa and Marcus stare in shock. A small digital recording device, its red light blinking steadily in the lantern light. She had been recording everything since the moment they entered the basement, a habit ingrained by 3 years of dealing with difficult hotel guests and the need to document incidents for management. "I've got it all," she said quietly. "Every word he said, every admission, every threat, and it's being automatically uploaded to a cloud server in real time." Dr. Hawthorne's silence over the radio was more telling than any response could have been. Rosa smiled for the first time since the earthquake began, a smile that held genuine admiration. "You clever girl. How long have you been recording?" "Since we got down here. It's a habit I developed for work, documenting difficult guest interactions, recording maintenance requests, that sort of thing. I turned it on automatically when things started getting weird." Emily looked directly at the camera in the corner. "So, Dr. Hawthorne, it seems like we have a different kind of leverage now." Marcus was staring at Emily with something approaching awe. "You've been recording us too?" "Everything," Emily confirmed, including Marcus's confession about his company, Rosa revealing she's FBI, and every single thing Dr. Hawthorne just told us about their organization and their methods. It's all documented, time-stamped, and stored where they can't reach it. The radio crackled with static, and when Dr. Hawthorne's voice returned, the professional calm had developed a sharp edge. That was unexpected, though not entirely unwelcome. It demonstrates exactly the kind of adaptive intelligence we hoped to observe. "Cut the research speak," Rosa interjected, her FBI training taking over completely. "We know what this is now. You're running illegal human experimentation, probably funded by some black-budget government program or private military contractor. The surveillance, the manipulation, the psychological pressure, it's all criminal." Criminal is such a limited term. We prefer to think of it as necessary preparation for an uncertain future. The data we collect helps develop training protocols for disaster response, military applications, intelligence operations. The work we do here saves lives. Emily felt her anger crystallizing into something harder and more focused. By destroying lives first, you admitted you accelerated Marcus's business collapse. How many other people have you manipulated? How many other subjects have you studied? More than you might imagine, fewer than you might fear. The non-answer was infuriating, but Emily pressed on. "And what happens now? You can't let us go knowing what we know, but you can't keep us here forever either." "Actually," Marcus said suddenly, "I think they can." Both women turned to look at him. In the lantern light, his face had taken on a grim understanding that Emily didn't like at all. "Think about it," Marcus continued. "They've been planning this for years. They have resources, organization, reach. Emily's recording is good leverage, but only if we're alive to use it. If we conveniently die in a building collapse caused by earthquake aftershocks—" "No," Rosa said firmly. "Too many people would investigate. The FBI knows I was working this case. They know where I was tonight." "Do they?" Dr. Hawthorne's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "Agent Martinez, when did you last check in with your handler? When did you last file a progress report?" Rosa's confidence faltered slightly. "This afternoon, I was maintaining cover as hotel staff. Deep cover operations don't require constant contact." "So no one knows you're here. No one knows tonight was supposed to be the culmination of your investigation. In fact, your handler believes you're at home in your apartment in Riverside, maintaining your cover identity as Rosa, the hotel cleaning lady." Emily saw the blood drain from Rosa's face as the implication sank in. "You've been feeding false information to my bureau contacts." "For months. It wasn't difficult. Your investigation was always compromised, Agent Martinez. We simply guided it in directions that served our purposes, while keeping your superiors satisfied with your progress reports. The betrayal was comprehensive, elegant, and probably legally bulletproof." Emily realized that Dr. Hawthorne's organization had been playing a game with rules and pieces that none of them had even known existed. They were amateur players who'd stumbled into a professional tournament. "But Emily's recording changes things," she said, trying to maintain some hope. "The evidence will disappear along with the device if necessary, though we'd prefer to avoid such crude solutions. Which brings us back to the choice I offered earlier." Emily looked at her companions and saw her own thoughts reflected in their faces. They were trapped not just by the earthquake damage above them, but by an organization with resources and reach beyond anything they could fight. The recording device in her hand felt suddenly fragile, a small electronic shield against forces that could reshape reality itself.
But something had changed in her during the night's revelations. The anxious, compliant woman that she had been would have folded immediately, would have accepted whatever deal was offered just to survive. The woman she had become was made of sterner stuff. "No," she said simply. "No." Dr. Hawthorne sounded genuinely surprised. "No deal. No choice between comfortable lies and dangerous truth. No walking away and pretending this didn't happen." Emily stood up, the recording device held firmly in her hand. "You want to know what you learned about human behavior tonight? Here's what I learned about mine. I'm done being invisible. I'm done being manipulated. I'm done being afraid."
Rosa was nodding slowly, her FBI training warring with a growing respect for Emily's courage. The girl's right. We can't make deals with people who destroy lies for data. Marcus was the surprising holdout. Are you both insane? These people have resources we can't even imagine. They've been manipulating events for years. You think one recording is going to bring them down? I think one recording is how it starts, Emily replied. Dr. Hawthorne, you said we've provided valuable data about human behavior under stress. Well, here's some more data for you. When you push ordinary people too far, sometimes they push back. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Emily could hear the building settling around them, could feel the weight of damaged concrete and twisted steel above their heads. But she could also feel something else, the weight of her own decision, the solid certainty of finally knowing who she was when everything else was stripped away. "Very well," Dr. Hawthorne said finally. "If that's your choice, then we move to contingency protocols." Emily felt her heart racing, but forced her voice to remain steady. Meaning, Emily, that your recording device isn't the only technology in that basement, and the earthquake damage above you is more extensive than you realize. The lights went out. Not the gradual dimming of failing power, but the sudden complete darkness of switches being thrown. The emergency lantern was their only illumination now, its battery-powered glow seeming suddenly fragile against the absolute blackness pressing in around them. Motion sensors indicate several structural weak points in the ceiling above your location. Aftershocks in this area are quite common following major seismic events. Buildings damaged in the initial quake sometimes experience secondary collapses hours later. Emily understood the threat immediately, but it was Rosa who put it in words. Controlled demolition. They can bring down sections of the building and make it look like delayed earthquake damage. Such a tragic loss, Dr. Hawthorne continued. 3 people who survived the initial disaster, only to be killed by aftershock-related structural failure. The hotel staff who died trying to help guests reach safety. The FBI agent who was investigating financial crimes. The businessman who lost everything and was found in the wreckage with suicide pills in his pocket. Very believable. Very sad. Marcus was shaking his head in disbelief. "This is insane. You can't just kill people to cover up research projects." "Marcus, my friend, you've been suicidal for weeks. Emily, you're just a night shift hotel employee with anxiety issues. Rosa, you're an FBI agent whose investigation was going nowhere. None of you will be deeply missed, and your deaths will be easily explained by the natural disaster already in progress." But Emily wasn't listening to the threats anymore. She was listening to something else. A sound that had been bothering her since they first entered the basement. A barely audible mechanical humming that she had attributed to emergency systems. Now, in the complete darkness, she could hear it more clearly. It wasn't emergency systems. It was excavation equipment. "They're not going to collapse the building," she realized aloud. "They're digging us out." Rosa caught on immediately, but not to rescue us. To retrieve the bodies and evidence after a tragic structural collapse, Emily finished. "Except we won't be dead when they find us, will we?" Dr. Hawthorne's silence was answer enough. Marcus laughed, but it was the laughter of a man who had moved beyond fear into a kind of fatalistic clarity. "So what do? We're trapped in a concrete box with people above us who can control whether we live or die. Emily's recording is meaningless if we're not alive to use it." Emily looked at her companions in the lantern light, these 2 people who had become the most real part of her life in the space of a few hours. Rosa, the guardian who protected others through necessary deceptions, Marcus, the fallen man finding his humanity in the ruins of his pride, and herself, the invisible woman who had found her voice when it mattered most. "We get ready to fight," she said simply. "Fight?" Marcus started her as if she had suggested they flap their arms and fly away. "With what? They have excavation equipment, probably security teams, definitely weapons. We have a lantern and some emergency water bottles." Emily smiled, and it was a smile that would have surprised her 24 hours earlier. It was the smile of someone who had discovered that being pushed too far could be its own kind of strength. "We have something better than weapons," she said. "We have the truth. And we have each other. And sometimes, that's enough."
The excavation sounds grew louder as the night wore on. The mechanical grinding of heavy equipment working through tons of earthquake rubble to reach their basement sanctuary. Emily, Rosa, and Marcus huddled around their single lantern, making plans that ranged from desperate to impossible, but gradually coalescing around a single, audacious idea. The recording is already uploaded, Emily explained for the third time, but it's not just sitting in some anonymous cloud server. I have it set to automatically post to multiple social media platforms, news outlet tip lines, and law enforcement databases if I don't check in with a specific code within 24 hours. Rosa was impressed, despite their circumstances. Dead man switch. Smart. But will anyone believe it? They will when it's corroborated by physical evidence, Emily replied. She had been thinking about this for hours, turning the problem over in her mind like a puzzle with pieces that were finally starting to fit together. This basement isn't just a research facility, it's a crime scene. DNA evidence, surveillance equipment, records of their activities. If we can get out of here alive, we can prove everything. Marcus was pacing again, his nervous energy focused by their desperate situation. Big if there. Getting out alive, I mean. The excavation sounds stopped. In the sudden silence, they could hear voices above them, professional, clipped conversations that carried the cadence of military or security personnel. Emily felt her pulse quickening as the reality of their situation crystallized. Dr. Hawthorne's people were here. They're through, Rosa whispered, checking her watch. 4:30 a.m. They made good time. The radio crackled to life one final time. I want to thank you all for your cooperation tonight, Dr. Hawthorne said, his tone almost conversational. The data we've collected has been invaluable. Your responses to stress, your adaptation to crisis, your willingness to trust each other despite deception, it's all been remarkably instructive. Go to hell, Emily replied, surprised by her own vehemence. Perhaps, but not tonight. There was a pause, filled with the sound of equipment being moved above them. The excavation team will be reaching you shortly. I want you to know that what happens next isn't personal. You've simply learned too much to be allowed to leave. The radio went silent. Emily looked at her companions and saw her own determination reflected in their faces. Rosa had found a piece of broken concrete that could serve as a weapon. Marcus had armed himself with the heavy emergency flashlight. They weren't going down without a fight. But when the basement wall finally cracked and light flooded in from outside, it wasn't Dr. Hawthorne's security team that greeted them. It was the Los Angeles Fire Department Urban Search and Rescue Unit, the reflective gear blazing in the morning sunlight that poured through the gap they had created in the damaged building. Real rescue workers, following up on reports of survivors in the Grandview Hotel basement shelter. We've got 3 alive down here, the lead rescuer called back to his team, conscious and mobile. Emily blinked in the sudden brightness, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Through the hole in the wall, she could see actual earthquake damage, collapsed buildings, emergency vehicles, rescue workers searching through rubble. The devastation was real. The earthquake had been real. But something was wrong. How did you know where to find us? Rosa asked the lead rescuer as they were helped through the breach. Anonymous tip. Someone called in with specific coordinates and said they were hotel staff and guests trapped in a basement shelter. Gave us the exact location to dig. Emily and Rosa exchanged glances. Dr. Hawthorne's people wouldn't have called in genuine rescue teams. So who had? The answer came as they emerged into the gray dawn light of a city struggling to recover from a disaster. Standing across the street, partially hidden in the shadows of a damaged office building, was a figure Emily recognized. Dr. Richard Hawthorne himself, watching their rescue with an expression of what might have been satisfaction. He was younger than Emily had imagined from his voice, perhaps 45, with silver-touched hair, and the kind of calm competence that marked him as exactly the kind of man who could orchestrate the night they had just survived. When Emily saw him looking at him, he nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps, even respect, before disappearing into the crowd of emergency workers and disaster survivors. He let us go, Emily realized, speaking quietly enough that only Rosa could hear. But why? Rosa asked. Emily thought about it as they were checked by paramedics and given preliminary medical clearance. She thought about Dr. Hawthorne's questions, his fascination with our responses to crisis, his apparent genuine interest in human behavior under extreme pressure. And she thought about her own transformation over the course of the night, from invisible receptionist to someone who could stand up to forces much larger than herself. Because we gave him what he wanted, she said finally. Real data about real people facing real consequences. We proved that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things when they're pushed to their limits. But Emily wasn't naive enough to think their ordeal was over.
As the rescue team processed them through the Emergency Coordination Center, she noticed things that didn't quite add up. Forms that asked more questions than necessary, officials who seemed more interested in what they had experienced than in providing immediate aid. Subtle signs that Dr. Hawthorne's organization was still watching, still gathering data, still managing their situation even in the midst of a genuine disaster response. Over the following weeks, as Los Angeles slowly recovered from the earthquake, Emily's life changed in ways both subtle and profound. Her recording had indeed uploaded automatically, but the files had been corrupted during transmission, a technical malfunction that IT experts attributed to network damage during the earthquake. Her testimony about the events in the basement was dismissed as trauma-induced confusion, the kind of false memories that survivors sometimes develop after catastrophic events. Rose's FBI investigation into Thompson Enterprises was quietly closed, the evidence that had taken months to gather mysteriously compromised by earthquake damage to both digital and physical records. She was transferred to a new assignment in Quantico, a promotion that removed her from Los Angeles and any possibility of continuing her research into Dr. Hawthorne's organization. Marcus disappeared entirely 2 weeks after the earthquake. His hotel room was found empty, his belongings gone, no forwarding address or contact information. Emily never saw him again, though she sometimes wondered if his disappearance had been voluntary or if Dr. Hawthorne's people had decided he knew too much to be allowed to roam free. But Emily herself was different. The anxious, invisible woman who had started that shift no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, more confident, more willing to take risks and stand up for herself. She left her job at the hotel and enrolled in emergency management courses, eventually becoming a disaster response coordinator. She never spoke publicly about what really happened that night, but she carried the knowledge with her, a reminder of what ordinary people could accomplish when they refused to be victims. And sometimes, late at night when she was coordinating relief efforts for some new disaster, Emily would think about Dr. Hawthorne and his research into human behavior under pressure. She would wonder if he was still out there, still gathering data, still pushing ordinary people to discover who they really were when everything else was stripped away.
She hoped he was, because the world needed more people who knew what they were capable of when it mattered most. The earthquake that struck Los Angeles that March night killed 127 people and injured thousands more. It was a tragedy that brought out both the best and worst in human nature, as disasters often do. But for 3 people trapped in a basement together, it became something else entirely. A catalyst for transformation, a test of character, and ultimately a reminder that the most profound changes often come from the most unexpected places. Emily Carter learned that night that strength isn't the absence of fear, it's what you do with the fear when you can't make it go away. Rosa Martinez learned that protecting people sometimes means accepting that you can't save everyone, but you can still save someone. And Marcus Thompson learned that losing everything can be the beginning of finding out who you really are when you have nothing left to lose. Dr. Richard Hawthorne, watching from shadows and surveillance cameras, learned that human beings are endlessly capable of surprising themselves and each other, especially when they think no one is watching. His research into adaptive behavior under stress continued, but he never again found subjects who demonstrated quite the same combination of courage, intelligence, and sheer stubborn refusal to be broken that he observed in 3 strangers who spent one night in a basement together while the world shook apart above them. The official record shows that 3 people, a hotel receptionist, a cleaning lady, and a businessman, survived 7 hours trapped in the Grandview Hotel's basement emergency shelter following the March earthquake. They were rescued by LAFD Urban Search and Rescue, treated for minor injuries and shock, and released to continue their lives. The unofficial record, stored in encrypted files in facilities that don't officially exist, shows something rather different. That ordinary people, when pushed beyond their perceived limitations and stripped of their comfortable illusions, are capable of extraordinary things. That courage isn't something you either have or don't have, it's something you discover you have when you need it most. And that sometimes the most important transformations happen not in spite of trauma and chaos, but because of them.
Emily still carries that small recording device, though the files it contained that night were never successfully recovered. She keeps it as a reminder of the night she stopped being invisible and became someone she actually respected. Sometimes she wonders if Dr. Hawthorne is still out there, still conducting his research, still finding ways to push ordinary people to discover their extraordinary potential. She hopes he is. The world needs more people who know what they're capable of when everything else falls away. And in her work as a disaster response coordinator, helping communities prepare for and recover from emergencies, Emily passes on the most important lesson she learned that night: that we are all stronger than we think, braver than we believe, and more resilient than we imagine. We just need the right circumstances to discover it. Sometimes those circumstances come in the form of natural disasters. Sometimes they come disguised as ordinary Tuesday nights that turn out to be anything but ordinary. And sometimes they come from mysterious organizations that study human behavior by putting people in impossible situations and seeing what happens. But however they come, those moments of revelation are precious. They show us who we really are when everything else is stripped away. They remind us that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. And they prove that the most profound transformations often begin in the darkest places with the simplest decisions: to help instead of flee, to stand instead of fall, to fight instead of surrender. Emily Carter learned all of this in the space of one night in a basement while the earth moved beneath her feet. It took the rest of her life to fully understand what it meant. But she understood enough to know that she would never again be the kind of person who disappears into the background, who accepts being invisible, who allows others to define her worth. The earthquake had shaken loose more than just buildings that night. It had shaken loose the woman she was meant to be. And that, perhaps more than any data Dr. Hawthorne collected, was the real measure of what ordinary people could accomplish, when pushed beyond their limitations and forced to discover who they really were. The night that changed everything had ended. The life that grew from its ashes was just beginning.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.